I should mention that today's video is going to end with my favourite book in my collection. It's not the best book, it's not the most valuable book, but it's the one I'm going to grab in event of a fire. Hello, my name's Gavin, this is Genre Books, and this is the third of my bookshelf excavations. So this is the third cubicle of these shelves, and this is the first video I've made since the first bookshelf video went up, and people seem to like it and gratifyingly have ideas of how I should be sorting my books. So I will be taking all of those suggestions under advisement. But I've got a little way to go before I need to make a decision. But let's see if inspiration strikes whilst I go through this week's selection. First up, we have some detective stories, and we have The Lady in the Lake by Raymond Chandler. Also Raymond Chandler, first printing of the Ballantine edition of Trouble Is My Business, with an underwater Tommy Lee Jones there, or looking through an aquarium. He's doing something. Here's another Ballantine that isn't the first printing, it's the 8th printing, and actually is in a lot worse shape, but this is The Long Goodbye. He was marked for extermination by the invaders from Mars. Corpus Earthling by Louis Charbonneau. Now this is a digit book, but looks different to the other digit editions I've got, and unfortunately this is in pretty bad shape as well. Terrible lean on the spine, and at least it has all its own pages. The Saint in New York from Hodder and Stoughton, book by Leslie Charteris. So this is originally from the 30s, but this is a mid-1960s reprint, presumably off the back of the television show that was out at the time. I don't know much about this next book. I don't think it's an anthology. It's either a selection of stories by various fantasy writers, or it is a group effort. But it is Smugglers, Merovignen Knights, Smugglers Gold. So it's edited by C.J. Cherryh and must presumably be some kind of anthology. So there are contributions from Mercedes Lackey, Roberta Rogow, Nancy Asaya, Robert Lynn Asprin, Chris and Janet Morris, Lynn Abbey, Leslie Fish, as well as the title story by C.J. Cherryh. Also has a fair amount of appendices, so Merovingian folklore, Merovingian songs, index to city maps, lyrics to songs. There's lots of supplemental detail. I don't know if this is maybe some sort of D&D campaign that got out of hand, but I'll maybe have to find out a bit more about this. More C.J. Cherryh, this time in Questar science fiction. This is Cyteen, The Rebirth. Another Penguin, old edition. This one, a bit spotty, a bit tatty, but The Man Who Was Thursday by G.K. Chesterton. This one looks odd. It's comedy horror from 1998, Bayan fantasy, and Black as Blood. Always a little bit worried when something as obviously schlocky as this begins with a quote from Shakespeare. But we'll see. These next two books are, I think, the second and the third in a series, quite annoyingly, because I don't think I have the first, so I may have to hunt it down. This is Charles Chilton, And these are books that I think originated as a BBC radio series. This is Jet Morgan and his crew of the Discovery. But I have The Red Planet and The World in Peril. I love the design of this next book, and this is Allan Caillou's Rampage. Now this is obviously a movie tie-in with the stars of the movie on the front cover there, and they reappear on the back. So that's a film I've not seen, but Jack Hawkins and Robert Mitchum, I really should find that. A story of stark courage and twisted emotions of two men and a woman playing out in the drama of their lives against a background of a treacherous jungle, of a magnificent black killer leopard, at once a challenge and symbol. An elemental novel whose nightmare climax erupts on the streets and rooftops of Munich. Intriguing. A Sphere science fiction collection, now the best of John Campbell. So this includes Who Goes There, which became The Thing. It has a foreword by James Blish, and it has none of the Morcott, Wade and the other guy stories in it. So good, because I don't think anything including those could have been considered best of anything. A few years ago I picked up this book, Speaker for the Dead, and the prequel to this, Ender's Game. I've read Ender's Game, enjoyed it well enough to keep the sequel to see what that's like. People say this one's better, so I will give it a go before deciding whether to get any more Orson Scott Card. An Ace Books anthology next, New Worlds of Fantasy, edited by Terry Carr, volume 2, and this has a great cover. So this is from 1970 and has stories by Robert Sheckley, Keith Roberts, Avram Davidson, Jorge Luis Borges, B.J. Bailey, Joanna Ross, Harry Harrison, Chris Neville, David Redd, and Roger Zelazny. Oh, and again on the second page, Terry Carr, Britt Schweitzer, Wilma H. Shiras, Thomas M. Dish, Catherine McLean, Leonid Andreev, R.A. Lafferty, and Robert Bloch. So some names very familiar to me, other ones are new, so I'll be interested to see how this goes. We seem to have hit the Lin Carters, so there's a warning to some of you. It's my Lin Carter trigger warning. But this next one is one I'm definitely going to be reading in the next year as I start to look at Underground and Lost Worlds. And this is a Lancer Fantasy Original Anthology edited by Lin Carter, The Magic of Atlantis. Brilliant cover, nice purple sprayed edges, and some big names included as well. So Robert E. Howard, Henry Kuttner, L. Sprague de Camp, Lin Carter, obviously, Edmund Hamilton, Clark Ashton Smith, and Nixin Dialis. Not a name I'm familiar with. Not entirely sure that's a real person. We'll find out. This publisher, I don't think I've seen books by before. Scripts Publications, London, Melbourne, Sydney. This is Lin Carter and Tower at the Edge of Time. The Lost World of Time. Barclay Medallion book, The City Outside the World. From 1969, Belmont Swords and Sorcery science fiction, The Giant of World's End. Unfortunately, a book that's a little the worse for wear. Indoor fantasy, can a dashing knight and his Amazon love turn magic gone awry into the salvation of two kingdoms? Mandricardo. From Mayflower science fiction, 4 great sagas of sword and sorcery, times 2. It's Flashing Swords 1 and 2. So volume 1 has stories by Fritz Leiber, Jack Vance, Paul Anderson, and Lin Carter. Volume 2 has L. Sprague de Camp, Michael Moorcock, Andre Norton, and John Jakes, and that is it's a Brack story, and a Lin Carter edited book with no Lin Carter story. So this is quite a rare artifact. Lin Carter comes in for some stick. I quite like Lin Carter, especially like him as an editor, as we'll see when we get to the Ballantine Adult Fantasy block, which is just here. Next up is a writer where I've got quite a few of his books. It's Jack L. Chalker. He is probably most famous for a long science fiction series called Well World. Unfortunately, I don't have the beginning book or books of that series, but I've got quite a few of the later ones. So I'm going to have to see if I can find the first one cheap, read that and see if it's worth completing that series. But here is an electrifying new novel in the saga of the Well World, and The Sea is Full of Stars. And from Bain Science Fiction, more Jack Chalker, I don't think part of the Well World series, but Belshazzar's Serpent. And now another writer who's got a big old series, a couple of big series. I think it's like the Rim World, or the Rim World series. And I have here Volume 4 in the Rim World series from Sphere. It says A. Bertram Chandler, Beyond the Galactic Rim. And then 3 more books by A. Bertram Chandler, or 6 books. I'm not sure. This timeline looks really confusing. I'm going to have to try and get a handle on it and see how much I have, how much I'm still to get. But here is Book 3 in the saga of Commodore John Grimes' Adventures of the Rim World of I'll try that again. So here is Book 3 in the saga of Commodore John Grimes' Adventures on the Rim of Space and the Edge of Time, the Dark Dimensions, for the first time together with the Rim Gods, by A. Bertram Chandler. Book 4 in the saga of Commodore John Grimes, Into the Alternate Universe and Contraband from Space. So this is, I think, a later printing than the other ones that I have of these doubles, and it tells me this is an ace double technically. And finally, and to be honest, with the best cover, is Book 5 in the saga of Commodore John Grimes, the Commodore at Sea, for the first time together with Spartan Planet. That is pure Star Wars Battlestar Galactica inspired imagery there. Next up, return to someone we looked at last week, and Mac Reynolds, Roll Town. So an Ace science fiction. The Ace logo has got a bit groovy for the disco era, something which could never be described as groovy, and that is Digits books, but I do like them. And this is Voices in the Dark by Edmund Cooper. Post-apocalyptic android shenanigans from, well, this cover and this edition from 1971, Edmund Cooper, The Uncertain Midnight. I'm not quite sure what this next one is. Fantasy, folk horror, romance. I'll have to read it and find out. But it's Crown of Horn, not Crown of Thorns, Crown of Horn by Louise Cooper. Next up is a thriller from 1981, and it's Alfred Coppel's The Apocalypse Brigade. This looks like a book that preys upon what people were worried about in the late 70s, early 80s, so it's the fuel crisis, it's terrorism. I'd be very surprised if the Russians aren't in there as well. It's very difficult to keep up with some of these publishers. This is a Timescape book published by Pocket Books, a Simon & Schuster division of the Gulf and Western Corporation. Anyway, it's from 1981. It's a fantasy. It's got, a fairly groovy cover. It's Adam Corby's The Former King. Now, I'm going to have to see if I like this. I do worry that it's the beginning of quite a large series that I might not be interested in. And I worry because it doesn't say the first book of, the first volume of, or the first in a series. No, this is Canto 1. A writer, by contrast, who has no pretensions at all. It's James Herbert and Creed. I say no pretensions at all. He's looking suitably gothic at the back here. Next up is Graham Greene. So I don't need to introduce him. It's Graham Greene, the heart of the matter. Here begins the war that even wizards dread. Across the mountains called Dragon's Teeth, beyond the chill reach of the werewind and the fires of world beginning, above the walls of the castle Fangdred, it stands, Wind Tower. From this lonely keep the Star Rider calls forth the war that even wizards dread, fought for a woman's 100-lifetime love, a woman called Nepanthe, princess to the Storm Kings. So, okay, I'm going to guess fantasy. A Shadow of All Night Falling by Glenn Cook. It's the first in the awesome Dread Empire series. I'll have to find out how many more volumes there were of the Dread Empire series. This one is from 1979. Here we go. Dedication for Fritz Leiber for encouragement and belief for the Dead Empire trilogy. So there are 3 of them. And this fills me with confidence. They have misspelled Fritz Leiber's name. Here's a rarity. It's a John Christopher book I've not read, and this is The Possessors. So, sphere science fiction. High on the snow slopes, the parasite chose its moment and struck. It began when a party of British tourists on holiday in a Swiss skiing chalet were cut off by an avalanche. The first shock came when a boy died, or appeared to die. After the shock came the horror as the boy took on a grotesque existence. I really like John Christopher books. Tripod trilogy when I was a kid, and then as an adult, The Death of Grass, Wrinkle in the Skin, Empty World, and The World in Winter. Pan science fiction now, and Arthur C. Clarke. This is not set in space. This is the Deep Range. So, underwater adventure. In Pan, Agatha Christie, Dead Man's Folly. So, Hercule Poirot. More Arthur C. Clarke, this time 3001, The Final Odyssey. Obviously the last book in the 2001 series. More Arthur C. Clarke, The Lost Worlds of 2001. So this is Arthur C. Clarke's book about the writing of the book of 2001 and the making of the film of 2001. Not read this yet. I really ought to. I think I've been subconsciously saving it. As opposed to this one, which I just haven't got round to yet, and it is Arthur C. Clarke and Gentry Lee. This is The Garden of Rama. So this is one of several Rama sequels. So I've read Rendezvous with Rama, which is the first. But I've not read Rama 2 or The Garden of Rama, which this is. So this would be the third in the series, and there is also a fourth. I don't know if I have that. I've certainly got Rama too, so I've got a massive version of it somewhere. Belmont double science fiction. This is The Flame of Iridar by Lin Carter and Chris Neville, Peril of the Starmen. Hal Clement's Mission of Gravity. This is a galaxy science fiction book. Ballantine science fiction and Hal Clement again, Cycle of Fire. And Sphere science fiction for Clement this time, Ocean on Top. So the next is one of the Penguin 70s, which was very short, a series of very short stories produced to celebrate the 70th anniversary of Penguin Books. And this is Jonathan Coe's 9 and 13th. A bit of a classic now, and Wilkie Collins' The Moonstone. The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes by Arthur Conan Doyle. Human Crisis in a Computer World. This is The Steel Crocodile by D.G. Compton. Well, there's a seamless lighting change for you. I bet you didn't even notice. The next is a book set in a new ice age. This is Winter's Children by Michael Coney. Next is The Gods in Anger by Adrian Cole, book 4 of the Omoran saga. And I'll see, but I don't think I've got any other books in the Omoran saga, so the gods aren't the only ones angry in this case. Next up is 3 books in the same series from Colin Greenland, and that is Take Back Plenty, Seasons of Plenty, and The Plenty Principle. I think there may be one other. I'll have to look that up. This next fantasy is a rock science fiction, which I think is a subsidiary, or was a subsidiary, of Penguin Books. This has like an embossed, raised figure on the front. I don't know if you can see. Almost lifelike 3D quality there. This is Deathstalker. Unjustly branded an outlaw, Owen Deathstalker summons the warrior's heritage in the heart of rebel space. I mean, if your name's Deathstalker, you're sort of asking for trouble, to be quite honest. But this is apparently Simon R. Green's most extraordinary novel yet. I am going to reserve judgment until I've read it. So I don't know actually if this is fantasy or this actually is science fiction in a sort of Dune type setting. We have laser guns and swords, so this is Sword and Planet, Sword and Sorcery. It's something. I know exactly what this next one is, and it is The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is an edition of the Ballantine original paperback. Not the first, but the original, or the best. The authorised paperbacks. So Ace brought out a series of Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings when they noticed that Tolkien had the copyright to the hardbacks but not the paperbacks in the US, and took advantage of this fact. Tolkien was not best pleased and quickly authorised Ballantine Books to produce paperback versions. And it's that really which made The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit really popular. People knew about them, but whilst they were in hardbacks, they didn't have that reach. In the paperbacks, everybody knew about Tolkien. Now, I got this book in part of a job lot, and I was a little bit excited because you never know. It might, what if it's like the first edition in paperback? I mean, it's a bit battered, but it certainly looks the part. Cover's great. It says there, the authorized edition. Could it be? I thought. What it is the 38th printing of the revised edition. So I was only off the first flush of editions by 43. And it's got some nice blurb in here about the Lord of the Rings. So Arthur C. Clarke says, I have read Professor Tolkien's Lord of the Rings not once but twice. In the highest and most complimentary sense, this is escapist fiction at its finest. Yet, at the same time, it has profound relevance to our troubled age. And in his New York Times book review, for anyone who likes the genre to which it belongs, the heroic quest, I cannot imagine a more wonderful Christmas present. No fiction have I read in the last 5 years that has given me more joy than the Fellowship of the Ring. And that was W.H. Auden. I think the author would agree hasn't had as big an impact on fantasy as The Hobbit, and The Lord of the Rings is Thorin Gunnarsson's The Dragon King of Mystara, which is an advanced Dungeons and Dragons novel. Louise Cooper again, this time The Initiate, book 1 in the Time Master trilogy. And okay, this is Tor fantasy, and I love that cover. Henry Fielding next, and Tom Jones. This looks like the full whack version of Tom Jones. I do have an edited version somewhere as well. But yes, here we are, sort of 900 pages worth. More Dungeons and Dragons, and you don't get much more Dungeons and Dragons than this. This is part of the Gord the Rogue series, Knight Errant by Gary Gygax, who started the Dungeons and Dragons game. And I don't know how good a writer he is. I've not read this yet. I will try not to read anything into the fact that, as you can see from the punched hole here, that this is a remaindered copy. I'll just have to see. This next book is the third volume in a trilogy, again annoyingly, but this is one I think I'm going to get the other 2 volumes too, because one of the science fiction themes I want to be reading in the next few years is size difference and miniaturization and gianticism on the other side. And this is Lindsay Gutteridge's Fratricide is a Gas. This is the sequel to War in an English Country Garden and something Cold Pine, Killer Pine. Anyway, there are other 2 books in this series, but here's a man fighting a praying mantis, so I'm in. And as I'm reading underground, underworld, lost world stuff in the next year, this is definitely on the list. This is Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle's Inferno, where Dante is a science fiction writer and Benito Mussolini is Virgil. In the final straight now, and Philip Jose Farmer, stack of his books, so expect some crazy covers. In Ace Science Fiction, The Universe Makers. In Sphere Science Fantasy, A Private Cosmos. In Signet, Lord Tiger. In Quartet, Dare, Barclay Science Fiction, and here it says, for the first time in paperback, this is, I believe, the beginning of his Riverworld series, To Your Scattered Bodies Go. Annoyingly, I don't have the second book in the Riverworld series, but I do have the third and fourth. So I have The Dark Design, and The Magic Labyrinth. And finally, and some of you will have seen me show this book off before, because I'm going to keep showing this book off, because this is the last in this selection and my most prized book possession. So it's a battered old copy of 2001 from Arthur C. Clarke. To Gavin from Arthur C. Clarke. So I think the only thing I've learned is that toying with the idea, and I think someone had suggested sorting stuff by publisher. That had some attractions, but just going through those Jose Philip Farmer books now and seeing half a dozen books in quick succession, all with different publishers, that's going to cause me issues. I would still be in a position where I wouldn't be able to find anything. The shelves might look a little nicer, sorted by publisher. It might look all like the DAWs or the Ace Doubles, but I do think I'd still be spending a lot of my time casting around trying to find something. I'll continue to ponder. But until next time,